population density is kind of a, I want to say per capita type problem, but it's really just a rate per one, because when you're talking about population density, you're not talking about per people, even though this is a population problem. We're talking about people per square area. That can be square feet, square miles, square meters, square anything. But you'll notice, remember, per means division. So now we're putting people on top, and we're putting square area on the bottom. So population density is simply the amount of people you have in a square area. So people talk about the population density of Chicago, of New York, of LA, that kind of thing. All right, so let's play with this. Now we have ourselves a table of 6 countries. We're going to do the U.S. together, and I'm going to have you finish the rest of the table. So if I want to find the population density of the United States, I want to put the population on the top. So the United States is 309 million. Remember, the million is times 10 to the 6th over the area, which is 3,717,811. Now, depending on your calculator, you might be able to type this in as, scientific notation, or you might need to put in your 6 zeros after the 309. Either way, you should get the same answer, and it should come out to be approximately 83.11. That means, on average in the United States, if you would take a square mile, which is a square, which is a mile on each side, okay, so a mile by a mile, there are roughly 83 people living in that square mile. And you might say, oh, I live in a country, I'm the only one for miles. Well, that might be true, but go to New York City, where the population density is a lot higher, and that it averages out, right? Go to Montana, right? It's going to be lower, but it averages out for the country. Okay, I want you to hit pause on the video, and I want you to find the population density for each of the other countries. Remember, population on top, square area on the bottom. Then come back and check your answers. Go ahead and go to 2 decimal places for all of these just to stay consistent. Okay, looking at the rest of these countries, you can see that Mexico, France, Japan, United Kingdom all have populations in the millions, while Iceland just has 317,630 people. So while Iceland has a really small area, they also have a small population. So their population density is definitely the smallest. They only have right around 8 people living in that square mile, where you can see Japan has 877 people living in a square mile. Just very, very, very different. Okay, let's go to number 1. Using the table, if the proportion, we're playing that what if game that we talk about with proportions. If the proportion of people to square miles were the same in Japan as in the U.S. Okay, so we are comparing Japan to the U.S. And we are talking about population density. So we're talking about people to square area. How many people would we expect to live in Japan? So the question is, what if? If Japan was like the U.S., and we know that they're not. Look at the values. Here's the U.S., here's Japan. It's very obvious those are different. So we're saying pretend Japan was like us. How many people would they have to have a population density like us? Well, we know that the U.S. has 309 million people. And I don't need to put million. I just know that the Japanese answer will also be in million. And then the area. Well, the square area of Japan is 145,883. And the square area for the United States is 3,717,811. So remember, we've got to cross multiply. So my 3,717,811 x equals, multiply the other direction, and I get 45077,847, 45,077,847. I'm going to divide both sides by my 3 million and change, because that cancels these out, and I'm left with an answer of x equals 12.12. And again, it's people, so we know that it's million. So if the U.S. and Japan had the same population density, we could expect just 12 million people to live in Japan. Now, not comparing to that actual. So if Japan was like the U.S., it would be estimated that 12.12 million people live there. But we know that the actual is 128 million. So how does that compare? Well, the actual is more than 10 times the expected. So Japan is more than 10 times denser, which we could have gotten that from this. If you take the U.S. and you multiply it by 10, you get 831, which is still less than Japan, right? So it gives us that Japan is just more than 10 times as dense as the U.S. It's really kind of crazy. All right, now just looking at the table, who has the largest number of people per square mile? Well, we've already talked about Japan at 877.42 per square mile. Who has the least? Well, that's Iceland at roughly 7.99 people per square mile. And what does it mean for two countries to be proportional in terms of their population and area of land? Well, if we're talking about population and square area, for them to be proportional, right, that would be for this proportion to work. Remember that population over square area is population density. For two countries to be proportional in terms of their population and square area means they have the same population density. So if you look back at this table, none of these countries have the same population density, so none of them are proportional in terms of population and square area.